People online, feel free to see if you can use the chat and let us know where you're from. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and then we'll get everything going. So hi everyone. So this is my name is Sam Reeve. I'm with Comp Team, and we're glad to have you here today. We're going to get ready to kick off the Reward Systems Mastermind here. Today we're going to be talking about that mitigating risk, improving security, all those benefits that come with the implementation of a compensation system and automation. So we'll go through that here in a moment. So let me first start by introducing our team here. We have Howard Nisewitz. He's a reward system strategist. Howard has a great passion in compensation systems and automation. And he's been with Comp Team for over a year now. So we're glad to have Howard. And also we have Heather Hormel. She is our data analytics expert at Comp Team, and she helps with a lot of system selections and helping clients get their data in order and helping them with these implementation processes. And then also I want to introduce our experts today. So we have Bob. Bob is the CEO of DecuSoft. He's been the CEO since 2015, but he came on to help his brother transition the business. His brother started DecuSoft, I believe, in 2002. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah, correct.
And so, and Bob, you were helping with the sales and business development during that time, and now you're the CEO. And I know you have a great passion for compensation and helping companies get these systems in place. So thank you for that. And then
Thanks,
also we have Rebecca, and Rebecca's been at DecuSoft for over 7 years now, and a lot of experience in business analytics and implementation. And I think that one thing that Rebecca mentioned that she really enjoys is the fact that every client is different, and so it never gets boring there at DecuSoft. I think you said something about the differences of clients earlier, Bob. So no client is the same. You've seen one, you've
seen one.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah, and I think I can definitely account for that. I mean, everybody has their own way of doing compensation, and that's the importance of these systems to ensure that they're flexible enough to account for all these differences and so forth. So glad to have you both here. All right,
Thank you for having us.
You bet. So let's go ahead and get started. Mitigating risk and improving data integrity in compensation management. So it's all you and Rebecca, Bob.
Great.
All right, can you forward to the next one?
Sure. Here we go.
Thanks, Sam. So today I just want to give a little bit of an overview of who we are. We have a product called Compose, which is a specialized compensation management solution that helps plan, administer, and manage variable compensation in a secure web-based platform. So we basically help simplify the variable pay programs, and we integrate with a lot of the software suites that are out there. One of the differences with us is that we are a best-of-breed point solution. We do not have a suited solution offering like some of the Workdays, the Oracles, and the SAPs, but we often are used in conjunction with them, and we integrate with those various platforms. We started as an application development firm, so one of our biggest benefits is that we provide a lot of flexibility. So a lot of our customers have what I'm going to call unique demands and needs, and we try and get a really good understanding of what they want to accomplish, and then we tweak Compose to accommodate them and meet their needs, opposed to some of the off-the-shelf software platforms that are kind of like a one-size-fits-all. So one of the things with us is we try to allow for unique demands of our customers and tailor the software to meet those needs.
Hey, Bob, just a question for companies that have, or Rebecca, for companies that have Workday and they say, oh, there's a compensation module. What have you seen in terms of companies saying, it just doesn't work for us?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously Workday is working for a lot of people, but if you have complexities in your plans or individual nuances that can't be met by their out-of-the-box comp offering, then looking to specialized offering in the compensation space is another alternative to consider. So I think some variables that lead people there are complexities, specific data elements, or needing to bring more data into the process than just what may be housed in Workday to really build out a true compensation repository more than just your people data.
Great. Thank you.
So what we're going to be talking about today is really what are the benefits of automating compensation in terms of productivity, ROIs, and basically at the end, how to select a vendor. It's a good time now, being that it's Q4. Everyone's going through the pain of the end of the year cycle. So the battle scars and the wounds will be fresh in everyone's mind come January and February, and a lot of folks will start looking to evaluate and procure systems for next year. So we can touch upon some of the things that we see from mistakes to avoid, questions to ask, and things like that. And again, there's a lot of key questions that should be asked throughout a process, and we'll just share some of our experience from doing this for 18 years and share what we've learned with you. So some of the key benefits as we transition in terms of why would you want to automate. I think the best summary would be that you want to improve data integrity. So approximately, nearly 90% of customers that move to an automated platform report a market increase in data integrity, which is what you would expect and want to do, especially if you're coming off of spreadsheets or doing it some other manual way. And then the secondary benefit is you want to see nearly 80% report a decrease in the time and the resources required to manage, implement, and actually plan the compensation processes. We have had customers tell us that prior to implementing a solution, they would take a comp cycle that would take anywhere from 2.5 to 3 months by the time they sent spreadsheets out and got them back and forth with their management team and business line managers, and then go into an automated solution, and it now takes 2 weeks. So you can imagine what you could do with that increase of time saved and picked up by doing it in an automated manner. The other thing that I want to point out is a lot of firms that use spreadsheets, we can talk about some of the issues inherent to spreadsheets, things like version control, lack of auditability, security, and things like that. But the big thing is a lot of customers see errors reported in the spreadsheets that are inherent to the formulas and things like that. So those are some of the benefits in terms of, again, why you want to automate. Rebecca, if I missed anything, feel free to.
I just want to add, in addition to some of the efficiencies that Bob has mentioned, once you have a more streamlined and automated process, you really can start to think about how to use your compensation resources in better ways. And really you can start to think about not needing to chase down participants in your process and errors in your data, but instead focus on analysis of your data and perhaps how your pay is being distributed among your employee base. So just a different way to reuse your resources and will give your company really interesting insights.
Yeah, I might add that's a great point, Rebecca, because especially now we have seen with the some of the companies that we call on being adversely affected by COVID. Some have benefited, some have had to downsize where they've had furloughs and some layoffs. And obviously when you can automate and do more with less, there's some benefits there to Rebecca's point.
Yeah, I know from my experience when I was in-house managing compensation, one of the scariest things was, working from a master database and having to cut files up every which way you can imagine and send them out over emails to managers all over the place and worry about, the data quality and integrity and control. And then they're further manipulating the data and getting the spreadsheets back and worrying about whether data was changed, critical data was changed, the inability to audit, so many issues and so many concerns.
Yeah, nothing's worse than sending out a manual spreadsheet to somebody and then realizing that, oh geez, I shouldn't have included so and so is on that.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to see their comp, and you know,
Yeah.
in a system like this, I mean, you prevented from that. I mean, data security and privacy is a huge issue right now, and these systems can avoid those foul ups, right?
And Sam, we have had instances where we've had two instances. Obviously, we're not mentioning any company names, but the exact same scenario you mentioned, where spreadsheets went out that were multi-tab, that they didn't realize they were multi-tab. So other business line managers saw the peers' respective spreadsheet tabs. It was quickly recalled, but it did happen. We've also had another instance where data was sent out, including social security numbers and things like that. So these are definitely, not scare tactics, but there are examples when people are working hard, long hours and trying to meet deadlines where things like that can happen.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Or that the infamous hidden tab, right? So it's like, oh, it's like,
Oh, I hit it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
that
there's
doesn't get by an Excel wizard.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the thing is that we're all rushed nowadays, and having a system that is going to protect data and protect us professionally is definitely a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving along. So one of the things we see changing a little bit is that in the past, compensation was more of a silo, so to speak, where a lot of the firms had a end-of-year compensation cycle, so the system wasn't used year-round. We're seeing a transition and shift. I know we were talking a little bit about this before the call, but there's been an increased focus on compensation management. And, let's face it, 70% of a firm's total expenses are tied to labor and compensation. So that obviously is one of the reasons why. But we see it almost being a crossroad between HR, IT, and finance, with finance taking more of a proactive role because, a lot of times they're funding the product, but we just see that there's more year-round usage of a system because companies are going to mid-year cycles, quarterly cycles, and with the incidence of COVID, we see more frequency of pay reward types. So there's more use for a system and more reporting functionality, especially from finance wanting to see modeling and analytics. So that's just some of the landscape we see. I don't know, Rebecca, if you have anything to add or anyone on your end, but that's what we're seeing in our marketplace.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is I think that the way that companies are getting employees to join their firm has changed over time. There are more special one-off scenarios or agreements made, guarantees or special instances that they don't want to just have to go through contracts at year end to make sure all of those incorporated into the comp cycle. So really, once you have a tool implemented, as Bob mentioned, you can use it year round. It can be part of the onboarding process. So it's a much smoother transition into your compensation cycle.
So I thought take a quick snapshot. This is what we typically see in terms of who's looking to buy compensation software. We usually see them in one of three groups. I know we've talked about Excel, but there's a group out there that's just using Excel, and then they just hit a wall and say enough of the pain and suffering and some of the issues. Let's find a system to do this more efficiently. Then there's a group that's a little, brave, and they want to take on building a homegrown system. And the problem with that is now they have to maintain the on-prem care and feeding of a system in terms of the operating system, the hardware, the middleware, the security. And then if one or two of the people that have the IP to that system leave, it puts a lot of risk on a firm to have all their eggs in so few a basket, so to speak. So we see firms that would migrate off of having a homegrown system to go to a secure web-based platform. And then, Howard, you touched upon this before when you asked us about the human capital, the management suite solutions. A lot of companies will implement one of those thinking that they'll get satisfaction from all of the modules, and then afterwards they'll realize, we may not have gotten everything we wanted out of everything, in particular comp. So let's add a best-of-breed point solution, leverage that investment, and have the calculations be done there, fed back into the system of record, and then out to payroll. So those really are just a snapshot of the three buyers that we typically see.
It's funny, you know, people seem very in compensation seem very wedded to Excel, and usually it's when they reach that, you know, kind of breaking point of something having blown up on them. But you know, if you really think about Excel and how it was designed, it was never intended to handle the complexities of compensation management and administration that companies are facing and dealing with today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And another thing I wanted to mention on that third bullet that you have there, the HCM system. I mean, I don't know how many times a client will be sold on the fact that their payroll provider has a bolt-on that'll do the compensation management system, and it is functional, right? But the problem is that everybody does it differently, and a lot of those Swiss Army knife type companies that have multiple bolt-ons, they're not going to cater to the needs of the specific needs of a client. And I know that DecuSoft in particular, I mean, it has a large amount of financial clients that have specific programs and needs, and they require expertise in that area. So I understand that you guys help them a lot with that. Is that right there, Bob?
Yeah, that's a great point. Especially, listen, a lot of times the suite of solution will suffice if you have what I would call less complex type of pay plans, and just doing simple merit and bonus type things. But when you get into some of the financials, or even some of the large retail that have component-based bonus, or they have things like carried interest, or they have complicated deferrals and vesting schedules, a lot of the off-the-shelf platforms just aren't meant to accommodate for that. So again, it's just a question of upfront determining what you need. And not only today, if you can think about what your needs are going to be in 3 to 5 years, because it's not an easy process to rip and replace. There's risk inherent to doing these projects. So you want to kind of get it right and find a system that's flexible and can grow and scale with you, because what you put in day one may not look the same in day 3.
I think that's a great point. We talk to a lot of people who are in different varying points of their evaluation, and I think the most important part of this advice that I would give is know yourself, know your environment. Are you someone who is making lots of 11th hour changes? Do your comp plans change year after year? Do you have a lot of different types of data that need to play into your process? And is there complexity in your plan? And everyone's going to answer those questions differently. And that's why there's lots of different options and solutions to meet different levels of need. But I think knowing yourself is sort of the most important part as you enter into the process, and picking a solution or a partner that fits with you well.
You can yeah. So one of the main benefits why you're going to implement software like this, as we mentioned, is really to mitigate risk. There are a lot of folks that use spreadsheets, and I just want to make it clear, we're not trying to put anyone out of a job. The spreadsheets, in my opinion, never ultimately go away. One of the first questions Rebecca and I get asked is, can I export data from my system back out to Excel? Can I still use Excel? And the answer is you can use Excel. We just want to do it in a way that you can mitigate risk and really give you a lot of time efficiencies back. And that's really the benefit of having all of your comp in a centralized repository, especially if you have foreign affiliates beyond the U.S., which exacerbates the risk of using Excel. There's a ton of data out there that talks about the percentages of errors in Excel. One third-party company is called Ventana that estimates about 83% of users that leverage Excel find errors in the calculations. Whatever the number is, I don't care if it's 50%, 60%, whatever, it suffice to say it's too high. So the best solutions coming out there really want to have you have the ability to manage comp in a centralized repository and be able to deal with things quickly and accurately, and just get rid of some of the inefficiencies tied to the spreadsheets. I know Howard Neisowitz famously posted some blogs in the past called PTSD, or post-traumatic spreadsheet disorder, and I think after Q4, a lot of folks will be dealing with that again.
Absolutely. Finding something repeatable, audible, are really very helpful, and no matter what solution you go with, those are sort of the key themes along the way. A single source of truth is also another one. You know, having one place, one centralized repository, all of those things will help mitigate risk.
So the other benefit we focused on is the data integrity. Again, if it's locally hosted in Excel and you're sending them out through email, there are risks, especially with GDPR, SOC, and some of those compliance things you have to be aware of now. It's critical that you have your data locked down and secure. Howard, you mentioned this. Excel was not really built as an enterprise-wide tool. There's some famous things that you can do with Excel and some Excel wizards we see out there, but at the end of the day, it really wasn't meant to manage your compensation, especially if it's complex. Some of the things that we've built in there are the version control issues, where you constantly see things being changed and you get back. Then if you have to cut and paste things to do some reporting and functionality, just a lot of risk and inefficiencies with the Excel and homegrown systems. And I think we've beat this one. I think we've beaten this horse as much as we want, but I think we could all agree what the issues are with the Excel.
I think there are some nuances. Oh, sorry, Howard, go ahead.
I was going to say there's the other issue of, when you have, let's say, the in-house expertise, whether it's the homegrown system or Excel, and then that person leaves, that knowledge usually goes with them, and someone else is trying to pick it up and figure out what the hell they did in terms of the programming behind the scene. So that's another risk that you run into with those types of approaches.
Yeah, one of the biggest risks we see, and it seems like a simple, easy thing, but just think about the version control issues, because you have HRBPs all over the place, and they're sending back a file, and then someone's creating a master copy of that, accepting all the changes from the line managers. And version control can get hairy to manage, especially in larger companies. And then the other thing is just the audit trail and the audit ability. One of the benefits of having everything in a central repository is you can tell who did what and when, and even if they have the ability to represent someone else, you can also determine who's doing what on someone's behalf. So just real critical factors that you just can't do with Excel.
But to any comp admins out there who are tuning in, some other topics I think in this space, a little bit more into the details, because that's where the devils live. Formulas, making sure that your formulas are capturing or excluding the proper pay elements. But rounding rules and currency conversion are two other very nitpicky topics having to do with data integrity. And then we also hear lots of things of, what if someone changes supervisors mid-process? Or what if we hire new people and the process has already started? How do we fit them in? There are so many nuances to the data and how it lives in this process through your comp cycle. And it really helps to have a system that forces a workflow or calls out anomalies in your data for you. There's a lot of scrubbing and building the master that we've been talking about up until this point in the presentation. But even when you're during your cycle, being alerted to anomalies in your data that have arisen from different things that users have done, at least you're clued into it more. The system can alert you to it. It can alert them to it. You can have some warnings and hard stops along the way to keep them from bubbling up. Something as simple as a rounding rule being in place can save you from being over budget when everything's rolled up to the top. So lots of finer details here within data integrity that anyone living in the details of a comp process and managing it is probably very familiar with.
And just a ton of flexibility that a system would afford you that Excel does not.
Right.
And then switching gears, why would you want to do this on top of the data integrity is basically to save time and money. So there are true ROI assessments. It's easy to quantify. If you have errors inherent to formulaic errors, payroll processing errors, you can identify ROIs attributable to putting software like this in place. That's kind of why you do it. So it's cost savings. And then there's also let's face it, compensation is a critical element to attract and retain top talent. So I think another benefit that is, albeit a softer cost, is the transparency and satisfaction that you get by being able to provide better communications in terms of total reward statements and show employees what are their true total rewards, including, their 401k, their benefits, and all of that through a system that can quickly be delivered and accurately. And a lot of the firms are, again, looking at a process that could have taken 2 to 3 months now to 2 to 3 weeks. It gives the administrators a lot of time savings back where they can do things that are more value-added and more strategic than the mundane act of managing spreadsheets. So it's difficult without a system to have the human resource departments keep employees productive, satisfied, and motivated.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned just the time savings, and I know that it takes forever to build spreadsheets for each year to use, and of course they get corrupted over an amount of time, so it's not like you can just pick them up and use them again each year after year without sprucing them up a bit. But another thing that takes a lot of time, as you mentioned, is just giving out those reports, those total reward statements that employees like to see. And having these modern systems in place, gives them easy access to that, so they can address those on demand. So it's great that we have that capability now, because I remember putting in those statements years ago was just arduous and painful.
Yeah, customers that are doing it manually or using Excel or mail merge and things like that, they often complain big time of that. Another benefit of doing that is we've seen instances with customers where they have printed them out and given hard copies and inadvertently left some laying around. One of the beauties of having it in a system is that it can either be securely emailed to a recipient and/or they would be granted password access where they could just go in and see their statement without the ability of printing it or anything like that. Again, another security thing that you can do in a centralized system.
I remember living through a last-minute change in the process, and we already had printed out all the reward statements, had, probably thousands of sheets printed out, and we had to basically chuck them all and start all over. So that would be alleviated as well.
A lot of long nights and weekends spent in statement generation.
So Sam, the next couple of slides switch to is looking at a system and what are the must-haves and some things to avoid and questions to ask. So quick summary of when you're looking for a system, what are must-haves? Obviously, we've talked about security, but that's really one of the main benefits. You can't take for granted that all the vendors in the space have the compliance and the audits that they do every year, but at a minimum, we've listed GDPR, the PII, the SOC 2 compliance, things like that. You want to make sure the vendor has that. In terms of reliability, one of the big things we recommend to our prospects is go get customer references where you can speak to your peers in a similar type industry on your own to get objective feedback. The vendor doesn't have to be on the phone. We think that recommendation and referral is much better when it's one-on-one. Data integrity in terms of centralized employee records is a must, and the communication abilities of a system to do email alerts, send out things like that is critical in those components. Rebecca, did I miss anything? I think those four were tops when
Definitely tops. Every company is going to have their own little nuances that they need to look out for as well, but these are definitely some common themes.
And then moving, we summarized what we thought were some of the common mistakes that we've seen, and if I went through these, not setting the objectives of the solution first. That seems somewhat obvious, but a lot of times we see when a committee was not formed, as the buying process evolves, different members join and have different objectives. It's better to set those objectives up front before the process begins. And then also get pre-approval for the objectives. We've seen often going through a process only to learn at the end, you don't have a budget, you don't have approval. So therefore, you've wasted not only your time, but everyone else's. So try and get pre-approval for the objectives up front. Not blending democracy with the software solution or selection basically means get as many members of your team and other teams involved, because the more people know and are on board, the better off it will be. You'll have a lot of cooperation and alliances moving forward versus people being offended for possibly being left out of the process. Believe it or not, we do find out every now and then that IT is often omitted until they get to the end and say, we're going to need this data, we're going to need this data. If there is an HRIS rep that's part of the comp process, we would highly recommend that you include them, because we often take historical data and want to get data feeds moving forward to and from HRIS. We'd rather have them aligned and liking our teams right from the beginning. Another benefit or another thing I would avoid is creating what we call a disjointed RFP. At the end of the day, it's important to identify what the must-haves or need-to-haves are. It would be ideal to find that unicorn solution that provided everything in the world. And ideally, you're not going to find, in my opinion, any vendor that's going to give you 100% of what you want. So the question is, what will 90% give me, and can I afford the other 10%, or can I grow into them over time? It's really important to prioritize what those must-haves or need-to-haves are, and then kind of going from there. And then the last two, it's important to maintain what I call a collaborative relationship with your vendors, so that eventually they're going to be a partner and a strategic provider. So you want to get that relationship going, and as you're evaluating vendors, get a feel for who can our teams work with, and can we see ourselves working with these folks moving forward? Because at the end of the day, it's all about people and having relationships, and establishing them early and upfront is critically important. And then we highly recommend that you do your homework before. I think there are statistics out there that show that nearly 90% of a evaluation of a vendor is done online before you even talk to a vendor. Look at those testimonials. Look at recommendations. What are customers saying? Am I connected to a particular vendor via LinkedIn or some of my peers? Can I get feedback before the process even begins? And then who are the key team members, and who's going to be involved on my project? Are you bringing in a team of A players, and then when we get to business, I'm going to have B's and C's? Evaluate who your team is and who's going to be supporting you throughout the process. We've seen a lot of companies go and hire third parties to run this process, and then create vendor scorecards and things like that. Because at the end of the day, you do have a day job, and if you could afford to find or hire a firm that can do this for you, there are a lot of companies out there that can do a better job managing that process. I think Sam, Howard, and others can help you with that. And they keep a degree of objectivity, and they also have a lot of experience of things to ask for in a vendor. And you can maybe add to that, Howard or Sam, but those are some of the things that we see after have done this for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that we often come across, and I'd like your point of view on this, Bob and Rebecca, is that a lot of our clients will come up and they'll reach out to us and say, "Oh, we want to put a system in place this year, and we want to do it by March." And and of course we're coming towards the end of the year. A lot of these companies are busy, and their bandwidth are limited as far as how much they can really dedicate to architecting a system like this. And then also and other issues may be in play as well, such as maybe their data integrity internally at that company is not the best. How do you typically work with or evaluate a company to determine their readiness of implementing in a quick time frame?
Yeah, I think really defining the scope and having everyone on the same page with the scope is probably the most important step. Nearly anything is possible with the right amount of time and resources, but being honest about what you're trying to tackle, the priority of what to tackle, and when you need to have certain things ready by will really drive the timeline. And that's a better approach to it than saying, picking a date and saying we have to jam all this stuff in by X date. Then you lose quality and things fall out of the process. So I think the scope itself should drive the delivery timeline as much as possible.
I've also been in meetings with Rebecca where when you're talking with customers about their implementation timeline, if there is a rush or they want to do something, you may want to consider doing it in a phased approach.
Great
So,
point.
for example, if it's fast approaching the fourth quarter and you want to get something up for year end, you may want to pick off your top 3 things that you'd want to see in that system for this particular year-end cycle, and then say, hey, as a phase 2 for next year, let's add those things in, and now at the end of that second year, you're getting all the things you originally wanted for sake of that compressed time period. And then data integrity is huge. Sam, 100% accurate. If you want to do something and implement it, and then you can't get accurate data, that presents a problem as well. And I saw a pop-up on the screen that I could barely read without my glasses, but it said something about Gartner to evaluate vendors as well. And I would agree using third-party resources to check vendors is a great source. And if some companies are not big enough, a lot of the best-of-breed solutions are not big enough to be included in Gartner. They have a division called Captera, and they also do software reviews as well. And that's a good source to get feedback on a customer. So just wanted to answer whoever popped that up there. Thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of those small emerging players in the marketplace that can provide great benefit to companies that might not be captured by those large players. Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that you mentioned, I really like the concept that you mentioned, that phased approach, because another feature or problem that we typically see with clients' implementations is they go, oh, that looks great, but wouldn't it be cool if we had a little star that popped up on the side, and or what, and they constantly want to tweak the system or do little changes that could jeopardize the timeline or quality of the system. So how do you typically handle those issues?
Yes, we sort of suggest that sometimes people try to put blinders on and stay focused on the key deliverables for year one, tracking and not losing sight of the nice to haves definitely along the way, but a project manager on either or both sides can really help with that as well. Keep your eye on the prize and be focused towards what you truly need to be successful in your first cycle on the system is so important.
Agreed. So in conclusion, in terms of vendor selection, things like that, why you're doing this basically is to centralize compensation, to mitigate the risk, create a lot more transparency, and what I'll call agility in terms of being able to manage the process and deliver and report functionality in terms of analytics and modeling. The software should be able to easily integrate with HCM and payroll systems. And let's face it, buying software can be a tedious and arduous process. So having a well thought out requirement plan and a core team, I would add a consistent core team where you have members dedicated to the selection process and are in all the meetings, enhances the communication and helps you potentially find the right vendor. And there's one study out there that I'd like to make reference to that basically states that almost 70% of a human capital management buyer ultimately regret their buying decision. And the main reason is not based on cost, the UI, or even the functionality. It's based on the service and support. So one of the key things you want to be aware of is what is the service and support that your vendor is going to provide you, not only from day one, but equally, if not even more important, post day one, in the year 2, 3, and 4 of those contracts, what service and support am I going to get, and how well can I see myself working with that team? Critical thing to find out when you ask for references, how the service and support is after they get that purchase order and they have the deal, how are they going to treat me thereafter?
Are there differences between firms that outsource service and support to a third party versus those that have an internal support team?
Howard, I'll be a little biased. I'm going to be a little biased here because a lot of the large players, they will use system integrators to implement the system. And we use our own team, and the reason why that model works best for us is because a lot of our firms have unique things that they want to do, and we like keeping a common team from the inception of the project on through go live, post go live, so that when you call us, we're very familiar with your plans, and we want to be considered, we want to earn the right to be an extension of your team. With the system integrators and the bigger players, they often have a implementation team, and then they move on once that implementation is live. And then when you call someone, you're calling an online community, you're calling a 1-800 number. So not to be critical, it's just a different business model. One's a higher touch, and one's just something that the system integrators do to meet their needs. Different model.
And what's your viewpoint? There's a wide range of providers that are out there, you know, from very inexpensive to, you know, $100,000 plus, you know. What's your take on that in terms of the range of providers?
I think, again, it has to do with what each company themselves needs in terms of their plan and their data complexity. So everyone's needs are different. Some of them will be met by lower cost solutions. Some of them require much more customization and high touch. And some of the bells and whistles that Sam had mentioned as well. It depends on your sophistication of your user base as well, and what type of analytics they're looking for to be integrated into the system. So all of those different variables will become drivers in the selection that will work best for you.
Yeah, not everyone is going to be, it's not a one size fits all. So there are some companies that are using Excel, and they could get away with using, you know, one of the web-based Excel type solutions, which are a lot more inexpensive. Quite candidly, they don't have all the bells and whistles of a best of breed, but you may not need that, or have the budget to pay for something that you may not need at that time. I think it's just important to lay out the things that you're looking for and find a company that would be a good fit, and then finding something that meets within the budgetary parameters in terms of finding a vendor.
Yeah, I like what you mentioned. You mentioned about the service model, ongoing service model, because that's another piece that we see a lot is that companies that are really cost constrained, they're going to want to pay that low price as much as possible, which may exclude a robust service model afterwards, of course. And it's important that people, when they're selecting a vendor, make sure that they know what they're getting and when. So yeah. Absolutely.
And what they'll need. I think there's always an individual component to all of this. Some people's comp does not change from year to year, and there are not many variables at play. So you may not need that high touch level of support, but there are definitely companies that do. So making sure, again, that you choose a partner that fits your needs is so important. Mm-hmm.
Or even, making sure that your vendor that you're working with is used to a high degree of customization, or in certain industries. We're talking about financial service. There's offshore oil. There's just a lot of different types of industries that have very complex plans in place globally that require a lot of individual tweaking, and maybe year over year as due to regulatory changes and so forth. And so having a partner in place that can adapt and has the knowledge of how to do that is critical.
Agreed.
Yeah.
One thing that we didn't mention, but I saw it on the last slide, and I thought it would be helpful maybe to point out to some that are listening today, is who should be in your core team? This is a question that we are asked a lot, and I just wanted to mention that in our opinion, the most successful implementation projects include someone who knows your data very well and is able to get it from your source systems. Additionally, HR and specifically the comp team needs to be part of your core team. And as Bob mentioned, in the way that we see the landscape changing, IT is an important player in this, not just from us supporting it going forward, but really being part of the configuration and the setup and planning out the security aspects of it, and finance as well. So finance will ingest a lot of the data and is interested in a lot of the data, and once it's in a system, they can get it in real time. So having them as part of the core project team, either through evaluation or even in implementation, is really key in a successful project.
Hey, Sam, there was a question that came up. It said, hey, Bob, and then it went away before I could read it.
Oh, I have
So
it right here.
apologize. I don't know if you caught it.
Yeah, I have it right here. And this is a good question from Vinit. So basically, there's some companies out there that have a focal process, and other countries or other companies that are doing an annual or anniversary style comp process throughout the year. And now, when we're looking at different systems out there, I mean, what do you guys do for those requirements of having that ongoing comp process throughout the year? How do you support that?
It's
Sure.
much more common now. So choosing a system that will allow you to have multiple compensation cycles open at a time is key, because you'll have one that may be later in the process where you're looking at some analysis or even running statements, where you might have a true off cycle for people who are getting promotions or salary changes intra-year outside of the main process. And then layering on top of it any plans that are looking to be driven off of anniversary date and which compensation cycle they should fall into. So again, just speaking to the fact that every company has their own unique needs, and finding a partner in your implementation team, not only in your software, to handle your individual complexities is key. And being as open and transparent about those needs as possible, as early in the process as possible, really helps everybody, again, working towards the same common goal of success.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I mean, over the past 5 years or so, we've been dealing with a change in pay for performance as companies move away from an annual performance review to something that's more frequent or even real-time feedback. And we all know that one of the common elements of motivation is to recognize recognize the activity as soon as possible after it's occurred. So if we're waiting to the year end to do a comp process, it hurts us a little bit in motivation and engagement of our staff. So what are you seeing on that front as far as companies that have implemented real-time feedback? What are they doing with these systems?
They're bringing their performance information into the system multiple times during the year. So in some cases, it might be quarterly, not just at year end, but a connection for that data to flow, especially with employee comments and manager comments, and having them integrated with statements. There's definitely much more common data transfer points and integration with the communication that goes out to the employee.
Mm-hmm. And with the lack of I mean, some companies have chosen to get rid of performance ratings and so forth. With the lack of that type of rating, how are you seeing companies attach pay and performance together in that environment?
A lot of companies are looking to outside vendors for market-related data, and there's a lot of analysis around salary ranges for similar type jobs and where an employee falls within their range. So there are lots of different data elements to still rank employees, even if it's not the traditional performance rating that we know of, or we're even seeing people who have two scales implemented. One is performance, and another is achievement potential. Sort of looking at multiple factors together instead of just relying very heavily on the single performance rating. So again, lots of different outcomes and solutions that different companies have chosen to implement based on what will work for them.
That's great. That's interesting that you mentioned that there's multiple measurements now. I know that a lot of companies have been thinking about, it's not just how you do, that performance, but it's also the behaviors and if it's alignment with company values and so forth. So there could be other measurements in there that are important to make the right pay decisions, right? So that's great.
Yeah.
What about the kind of what if situations? Do the systems allow for modeling different scenarios and budgets and being able to retain them and then review them with finance and management?
Yes, and I think anyone close to the process knows a comp team's work is never done. So even when the comp cycle is over, they're pretty much right away, they're thinking about how to change things for the next upcoming cycle or next upcoming fiscal year. And a lot of that has to do with playing around with data and the outcomes of data and playing through certain scenarios. So these are the what if modeling scenarios that you're talking about. It can be something as simple as tweaking budget percentages, looking at the impact of performance rating. considering reorgs within the company and how that's going to come into play. And again, finance will have their own scenarios potentially separate from HR comp teams. So all of these players combined, once the data is in a centralized repository, can do a lot of analysis and planning ongoing throughout the year to make sure that you're changing and updating your process in meaningful and relevant ways.
Yeah, Howard, we've had the more and more finance getting involved with the comp than traditionally, because they'll want to see, especially this year, they'll go to HR and say, hey, if these scenarios, we're going to do a haircut of X% and Y%, quickly tell me what that data looks like. If you have that in spreadsheets and you're pulling and cutting and pasting all over the place, it could take you over a week to get that information. It may not even be accurate. If it's in one repository, you can quickly, especially once you've identified what that report's going to look like and kick it out numerous times, you'll have that information in one repository. We're seeing more and more of things like that happening, especially now with COVID and some of the parameters changing to, some of the performance metrics having to change and things like that. If you don't have it in a centralized system, it's kind of hard to act and pull data from a source.
Yeah. Some companies, they'll get it really excited about having certain type of having a system in place. And I've seen situations where there's like, oh yeah, well, we want to put this bonus plan out. We have to have these measures, and we want to do have this equity plan and this new spot bonus type thing. And then they interface with you, and of course they say, oh, can you guys do this? And they go, oh yeah, we can do that. We can do that. We can do that. But then you come to the implementation and you look at what they're trying to do based on their current climate. And they may or may not be ready for all that at once. Have you ever come across a situation like that? And how have you handled that?
So often, so often. I think the core project team on the client side being on the same page with a clear set of requirements to be implemented within the system is the ideal path. Realistically, even getting 90% of the way there and then sort of understanding from your vendor, what are the possibilities within the remaining 10%, or engaging your vendor early in the process as you're talking through scenarios to understand what have other companies done, how have they tackled this, what are some options we have. But ultimately, the software needs to be configured against an agreed set of rules and behavior, and that takes a business decision first leading that.
Yeah, but I think that one thing that I often worry about is that when clients are looking at doing too much change at a particular time, and then they release that out to their managers like, oh, they got to go through training, and then pretty much they start blaming the system. Oh, I hate this system, and so it's like there's that kind of a risk. So have you come across that?
Definitely, and that's a great point. So implementing in year one something that looks familiar to what you had prior to being on the system is a great starting point. Using naming conventions that people are used to, data points that they're used to seeing, process that is familiar to them, but just replacing it with the system, it breaks down and makes it easier for them to just jump in and complete the pieces that they need to in a timely manner. And then you're right, sort of think of what will be important to tackle next, or what should we add in phase 2 or phase 3, instead of ramming it down everyone's throat in year one, sort of taking it into a phased approach.
Right. Great. So we have another question here from Vinette. I want to just make sure we've captured that. Does Compose offer features to replace Excel for data modeling in analytics and comp?
We do, yes. And modeling is a really interesting topic. We probably could have a whole nother webinar just about that alone, but I will mention that modeling means something different to everyone. So there is end user modeling, where they're looking at rolling up all of the employees that they are responsible for making recommendations for and playing around with how they're going to distribute their budget money. The second type of modeling is one that I think that Howard was hitting on earlier, and that's from a high level perspective on general approach for your comp plans and how to, from a company level budget, distribute it fairly among all of your teams. So it's sort of a bottoms up modeling approach or a top down modeling approach. But yes, Excel, obviously, you can build lots of different modeling tools. Compose has some as well. And I think that's an area where, again, if that's a need of your company, really important to share as you're going through your evaluation process to make sure that the vendors that you're looking at understand your perspective and your need and can offer you something to fill that gap.
Do you have that in the demo where you show the Excel reporting or no?
I don't.
Okay.
We can either get into it or we could talk about it in another time.
Nothing like putting Rebecca on the spot, huh?
Depending on how much time we have. Again, modeling can really be a whole topic in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and bring the demo up and start talking about that. But I really like what Vinit was talking about. I mean, this is a pretty insightful question because in the past, a lot of when people started thinking about compensation systems, they were thinking about that making the supporting managers to make the right decisions and the process after the budget has occurred. But now we're really looking at tools that are more cohesive, that help with the budgeting process and making that more efficient as well. So that's thanks for the question, Vinit. That was great.
It's so much more than just the the year-end actual administration. You got to think of all the possibilities it creates when you have good data in one place and the things that you now can do with it in terms of different types of analysis and modeling.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great segue into the demo. So we're going to take a high-level look at Compose today, and just as we've been talking about here, all of the different vendors that you may look at through your evaluation process are going to offer lots of different types of features, and that's the main pro. Once your data is together, leveraging some of these features that comp tools have in their environments can really help optimize the process for you. So I'm just like to show you some today, just to get you thinking, and some things that you would potentially want to keep in mind as you're choosing a vendor for yourself. First, as we're on the login page, I think the first thing to think about is how will your users access the system? Most commonly, it's some sort of web-based portal, but in today's day and age with mobile devices at the ready, how will users access the data from outside of their office or outside of their double screens? We've talked a lot about the fact that it's a very data-intensive process, but still there may be some pieces that are important to access when you are away from your regular workspace, especially when we can leave the house again.
Yeah, and really quick on this, I mean, I know that right now a lot of these systems are trying to be mobile ready and so forth. Will a single sign-on work in both environments on your phone as well as a computer?
Yes, absolutely. And two-factor authentication is a really another common tool in the space. So having a like Duo Mobile as an example, another authentication layer as well, is a pretty common integration tool at this point as well. I'm going to be logging in here as a first-level planning manager. Again, in thinking about the tools that a software provider in the comp space can offer, I think one of the greatest one is real-time analytics. So you'll see lots of different versions of manager dashboards. I think key things to look at when you're evaluating is, are these updated in real time? Can the widgets change based on the user role in the system? Because a finance user is going to be interested in different analytics than a low-level manager or a mid-level manager or a top-level manager or your comp team. So a dashboard really needs to be customizable just as much as it is updating in real time to give the needed information to the relevant type of user. So within Compose, all of the widgets are, you can click into them, you can drill into them, they are integrated and updated in real time. So just something to consider. Lots of options for workflow process, which we'll talk about in a minute, gathering your notifications and statements and reports. But I want to pause for a moment and talk about alerts, and actually I'll do that from the comp grid, so I'll just come back to this in a minute. And then analytics as well. So when you start to talk about reporting, without having a system, you have to report at the end of your process. But when you have a system in play, you can look at your data and how your pay is being distributed during your process, which is a huge pro. So getting yourself out of this work of creating reports and distributing them becomes much easier with a system in play. So lots to think about in terms of a dashboard.
Yeah, I like that. I think that one of the biggest things with managers nowadays is that, you know, the graphical interface. I mean, having something that's easy to understand. As comp professionals, we can really get into the numbers, and we understand grids and the detail, right? And we're used to that. But some of our managers are not, and they need more of a graphical interface. So I'm happy to see that on the front page there.
Absolutely. Even things alerting them to key dates within the process or things they need to know. You can train people until you're blue in the face, but having the system present it to them in a very intuitive manner right as they log in becomes very, very helpful to reinforce that training and that theme. Then we come into the comp grid, and really most providers are going to have something that is Excel-like. And one of the questions that was brought up from a participant are the Excel-like features. So absolutely, you want to pick a vendor that has the best aspects of Excel, but also gives you security and control. So when you talk about that, especially in a process that is very data heavy, it's how do you present all of this data in a meaningful way that's not overwhelming. So a grid-like display that is a mix of read-only fields and editable fields is a very common approach here. But there are definitely features within them, especially when you get into users that have larger employee bases that they're responsible for making recommendations, that make it just more easy to digest. Some of it is logical groupings of data, like the second level of headings, expand, collapse, so I can break these down and expand them out, just like in Excel. So you can look at historical data, then collapse it and expand it. You can look at your market data, expand it and collapse it. It really breaks down and makes it very easy to digest.
And Rebecca,
Yeah.
I have to interrupt her because when she gets on a roll, there's no holding back.
I get excited about it.
So one of the other things about the actual grid is you can drag and drop and move things the way you want them. So we've had instances where certain HRVPs want to see their grid a certain way that they're accustomed to. With a system like this, you can have the flexibility to have different grids for different people. Again, helping with the end user adoption and the experience that they're used to, just another factor to consider.
And actually, that's the biggest difference between a suited solution and a more niche provider is being able to customize the experience for different types of users. So an out-of-the-box solution might have a dashboard or even a comp grid that you are forced to say, here's how your bonus data is going to be displayed, here's how your merit data is going to be displayed, and you may have some wiggle room within a couple custom fields, but for the most part, the display is the display. And again, that may meet the needs of some companies, but others who need to have a very different experience for different players in the process will just need something that's more customizable. So our definition of a grid is the combination of data elements. And here we're looking at an annual grid. These are some key data elements that span a full year. But in our space, you can build however many grids that you need to. You could look at some that are just around equity distribution, some that are just pulling in merit and bonus fields. So at least in the world of Compose, we sort of think of it as each client has their own data dictionary. You can build and pull grids together that look at the correct combination of data elements and then assign user groups and security to it. So data elements can be hidden. Who you see or don't see is layered on top of it. So it's really a very dynamic experience, again, that varies not only by user, but in varying points of your compensation year.
Yeah, that's really powerful. You know, I'm glad that Heather's on because we've had a client in the past, where they're dealing with multiple currencies. Of course, we're in a world today where we have a distributed workforce. We might have somebody in Turkey, in India, and in the UK, and we're managing a team in the US and so forth. And I know that a lot of these systems can, bring up the pay in a local currency or the currency that they're dealing with now. But a lot of times managers forget they'll make all their planning in the US dollar. And then when it gets translated and delivered to the employee, then they get their new pay is $100,000 to $321.50. And so is there any way that you can do to help replicate or fix that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Compose does handle real-time currency conversion on the fly against a set of rates that the client would supply. So any numeric field can be currency converted by changing the currency selection here. But Sam, your point is a really good one. Sometimes we find that it's very useful for clients to have side-by-side columns within the grid, one that's Merit local, one that's Merit USD. So you're always looking at what your common reporting currency is right next to what the employee is actually going to get paid. One, for distributing the budget money, but two, you're absolutely right. If an employee is going to get something that has cents in it or rounds to $7 at the end of their merit increase, it just sort of looks a little wonky. So presenting it directly in the grid and in side-by-side columns is one way to get around it, in addition to the fact that the system itself can currency convert.
That's great.
The filtered budget summary here that we can expand and collapse is an important feature, sort of piggybacking onto that comment. Not every company manages to budgets, but those that do typically have an agreed budgeting currency. So having this, at least some sort of view into what money do you have to spend within your budget, how much have you spent, how much is remaining, or how much are you over budget, and even the system can have warnings and hard stops here. But again, visually clear, very, very clear. Where are you standing in terms of your budget? And what is the budgeting currency that we're looking at here? So you can make recommendations in employees' local currency and then have it all converted to a single budgeting currency as well. Mm-hmm. Another aspect to consider are compensation cycles. So we had talked about this a bit in our presentation before getting into the demo. Every client's needs here are unique. Some clients have fiscal year ends, some have off cycles together with fiscal year ends, but other companies, especially when they're looking at commission-based plans, really get into monthly and quarterly cycles. So being able to administer all different types of plans within a system forces the need to have different frequency of compensation cycles. Also, when you're moving from an out of system Excel-based plan, you likely have lots of disparate spreadsheets saved on share drives all over the place. So bringing them into the system from day one builds out the depth of your compensation repository. So being able to toggle to alternate comp cycles is one key feature. A second is being able to bring 1 or 2 years prior data into a current year grid. Trends are very important for managers when they're planning. They want to see what did someone get for the prior year or 2 years for their salary increase or their bonus percentage. The real takeaway from an employee is going to be a trend for them over time. And of course, the message can be delivered, especially around a year with 2020, where so much has been thrown up into the air in terms of variables for a company and a company's overall performance. But really, again, it really has to, for the employee, feel personal, and the message to them is, am I flat? Am I up? What has my year-over-year trend been? So historical data in a common year grid. And again, being able to expand or collapse it to break down and maybe segment out some of that year-over-year historical data within a grid is an option as well. Another piece, and we start to look at specific fields within the grid, is what are your company's own formulas? What are your company's own naming conventions and process? Do you have a merit matrix? Do you have salary guidelines? Are you calculating comp ratio? When you look at the definition of new salary or total comp, what pay elements are included or excluded in that? And all of that can be configured for you if you choose a vendor that allows customization. So Sam, this was something that you brought up. Not every company has that need, but there are certainly some that do. It's very common for us, especially in the financial services space, to see multiple definitions of total comp with and without certain pay elements. Is deferred comp part of total comp, or just cash out the door for this year? So all different aspects are at play. So having a software system that will allow you to port over your own formulas, your own naming convention, and making your own set of fields will really aid in the adoption of a system and will reduce what you are doing outside of system. So lots of things to consider there, and things that really can add into the complexity. Mm-hmm. in 2020, you wouldn't think that I would have to make this next point, but I think it's a common one and an important one, especially when we come up with other players in the space. Are you able to make real-time entry in the grid? Does it save in real time? Do you have to run a batch and then come back later and see the impact of your change? These are all really important user experience questions. So within Compose, anything that you enter into an editable field within the grid saves in real time and processes it downstream in real time. So any formulas that need to be updated based on that entry that a planning manager makes save and are taken into account in real time, but that's not always the case. So again, choose a solution that will fit for you. Sometimes there are complex batches that need to run, or especially in the case of modeling, how you're going to lay that out on the screen, and really what the end user experience are all very important factors to take into consideration. Mm-hmm. As Bob mentioned, export to Excel. So we have it here in the bottom left-hand corner, and this for us is actually a role write. So we find that people feel very, very heated one way or another in terms of being able to get data out of the system. So you need to know, again, are you going to allow people to pull data out of the system into an Excel? Can they be trusted not to leave it somewhere or not to print it to a random printer and just have it living somewhere, especially given the sensitivity of the data? Within Compose, this is a role write, but again, something else to consider with the solution that you choose.
Oh, that's great. So you can configure it by individual or level or whatever. Okay.
Correct.
If
again, I think it's pretty common. Yeah, go ahead, Howard, sorry.
I was going to say, if a client needs an update during the process, how do you manage that? You know, because you don't want to shut them out in real time when the managers are working on it. And so what's your process for dealing with those?
So I think DecuSoft, again, handles it a bit differently than other players in the space. We sort of take the rule of thumb that it needs to be a conversation. So especially when the process is opened and planning managers may have already seen or made recommendations, if that data were to change, how will you handle that? So it's really a decision with the out-of-system experience coupled with the in-system experience. And we try to minimize the in-process change from a software perspective. The other element to that is data and how often should data change within your process. And we also see companies approaching that from different perspectives as well. Some will freeze data as of a certain point in time date. And certainly if you're using a suited solution, I think that is normally the way it works. You choose your baseline date to pull into the comp module. Others choose to refresh certain data elements, even intra-cycle. So if salary ranges should change, and maybe you go out to your planners multiple times to say, we have refreshed market data or our budgets have been tweaked. This is what recommendation you made a week ago or a month ago. Revisit it and see how you want to tweak it. So all different variables at play and different philosophies around how up to date certain data points need to be.
Yeah. So Heather and I were talking about the proration issues that sometimes there may be different proration methodologies in different locations or sub-organizations. How do you typically handle that? Is that also assigned to groups or individuals?
Yes, so proration definitely is an area that I would put on the list when we talk about complexity. And not every company chooses to prorate, but for those that do, it gets very difficult to manage in Excel. So definitely, proration is common. There are lots of different proration triggers. One could be a job change, a salary change, a location change, change in status. So how are you going to treat someone who's been on a leave of absence and they're coming back? Are you going to prorate any element of their pay? And companies answer all of those questions differently. But if they are prorating, a system is a great way to go because it can take in large amounts of effective data and look for those proration scenarios and apply them according to your own company's rules. So a very common place, and I think I have an example here that I can pop up on the screen, in terms of bonus, you really need to think of, especially in a component-based bonus, the duration of time that an employee was attached to a bonus plan and those certain bonus metrics. So here, this employee, Kara, was assigned to one plan. So from January through December, she had a single plan, she had a single target. That isn't always the case. There can be changes in target, and so you would need to have a second row of data here, or in some cases, a third or fourth row of data. Some companies have lots of proration events that happen in their comp cycle, and again, the system can look for them, can create individual rows, can follow the bonus calculation all the way through and then sum up across those proration rows. So it's a lot of data, and that's the reason why we pop it up here in a separate pop-out rather than having it in a grid. In clients that we've seen trying to solve for this in Excel, their Excel grid instantly blows out by 100 fields because they're looking at all of the different proration data elements in columns. So it really can change the complexity and the span of your scroll in a comp grid.
This is great, Rebecca. This, often when I'm working with some of our clients, the biggest thing is how can we show the math in a way that makes sense for an everyday user on why the final bonus payout is what it is. And this is a great way to demonstrate that.
And once you have the detail within the system, then Heather, that conversation needs to happen again when it comes to the employee statement. Not all employees are happy to see an extreme level of detail. Sometimes showing a little bit less is more, but ultimately knowing your employee base, knowing your manager base, and knowing the complexity of your plan can help you work together with your implementation team to find that right balance.
Yes.
Another aspect to consider is submission approvals. So not every company, again, uses to look for a system to solve an approval process for them. But within Compose, we have this submit button in the bottom right-hand corner, which is going to allow a planner, once they're done, and it could be over multiple sessions, but once they're done making their recommendation for their team, to submit it up through an approval chain, and that the system will manage that for them. So in the world of HR comp, usually there's a very tight partnership with HR business partners who are working with the heads of the businesses to manage the compensation process while the cycle is opened. And there could be thousands of users who are participating in this process depending on the size of the company. So when you get into a larger company that has more players involved, having an automated workflow process through an agreed approval chain becomes a huge pro of implementing a system. Companies with just a couple hundred employees may not need this feature, but for those that do, having the data drive, who is the next receiver in the chain, how is the system going to notify them to come into the system and to take action, are something that can be managed through functionality that's like workflow.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for bringing that up. Oh, go ahead, Heather. Sorry.
Hey, Sam, I actually think you're probably going to ask the same question, but what I was thinking is knowing that it can approve forward, and how does Compose meet the need of having to send comments back? And often, we'll see something take place where the first line decision maker provides a recommendation, and then often the director or the next level may not necessarily agree. How does Compose regulate who can make that change, or what does it look like when it's pushed back?
So Compose sort of has two paths from there. So there is a rejection that can go along with an approval. So the upline can choose to reject back down with comment. And typically when there's a budget at play, that budget money needs to move up and down with that group of employees as well. Alternatively, we see implementations where the upline will just make the final decision, will update the recommendations in line, and the lower level planner may not know about it until everything is approved, and that communication is going to happen with the employee. So we do offer, along with submissions, a workflow process for rejections, but not everyone chooses to use that depending on how their process outside of system works.
Makes sense.
Another common theme that we see, especially, and I keep hitting on how much data comes into the comp process, but how will your users see a true full compensation history for your employees? And within Compose, our answer to that is this people page. So you may choose not to have lots of historic years of data within the grid, again, to cut down on that scrolling or the pop-ups in that very data-heavy environment. But this people page is a form view of a single employee at a time, and it will go back to display this employee's compensation history as far back as the client has provided data for. So data integrity and how many years back are provided come into play, but it's a great way to see, when was this employee hired? Where was their salary at the beginning? Where have they grown each year? You can show title changes. You can show, again, target percentage changes. We can create total comp sections here, but all of it has to do with a true at-a-glance page at an employee. And I'll just note, this is a very common landing page for clients when they are not in their normal compensation cycle. So when you're in your cycle and you're making recommendations, the grid view is the normal landing page or the dashboard home screen. But when you're outside of your compensation cycle or even on a mobile device, this page is sort of the most commonly used outside of a comp cycle because this lends itself much more to one-off scenarios or discussions and meetings that may be happening where you need to pull up and recall a detail of a specific individual employee. Okay. The last thing I want to point out while we're together today is reporting. So the biggest pro of having all of your data, and we've mentioned it multiple times in today's call, is really getting into much more robust reporting without manual effort. So here I just want to show you from the comp grid, you can pull up this quick reports icon. Again, security would need to come into play here. These are all of the reports that this specific user has, and because there are so many of them, we even have the ability to have a mouse over that can give a little bit more of a description of each of them. But very typically, end users may only have access to a handful of reports. It's really admins or the core HR team or finance that may have a larger report list like this. But it's important to choose a vendor that will allow you to decide when to turn visibility to statements or reports on or off, because your compensation cycle is going to have different needs throughout the year. You wouldn't want to have statements turned on until everything is approved and ready to go and ready to be communicated to employees, especially to Howard's point earlier. Some of those details can change really past the 11th hour. So being able to turn them on and off yourself is a really important control point. But then also considering the user experience. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open a bonus employee compensation statement. Ours will run in real time. And Heather, this was to the point that you mentioned below. This is a statement that's a component-based bonus. So there are a lot of elements here. It's showing the individual components that are making up their bonus, the weight, the actual, the goal. We've sort of planned for the superset of data to be shared within this statement, and then clients can add their own logo. They can choose to hide columns or rows depending on that right mix of data to be shared with the employee. But all of the math behind a calculated bonus can ultimately be displayed to an employee in a statement, if you want, correct? And then we talk about how to distribute them. They can be distributed, again, there's a lot of tradition in that communication and letting an employee know their new comp. So very commonly we see the manager themselves running statements and having that face-to-face conversation with the employee and still handing them the statement. But we also have lots of options for email distribution, again, with passwords, as Bob had mentioned. And also, if you are a part of a larger suited solution and Compose is sort of being added into the process, you also can do a bulk export of all of the statements and import them back into your HCM, so that can stay your single employee portal for them to look at all of their historical statements back in time. So whether the employee ever knows that Compose exists or not, again, is a company-wide decision there.
Mm-hmm. Great. I want to point out a question that Vinit asked on the
Sure.
on the chat here. So basically, how do you convince companies that that they should have this system open, or they should train managers at a lower level? What he states is this: why train managers to use a system which is only used once a year, and his clients often are concerned about the cost of training managers for using a tool just once a year. How would you respond to that?
I would argue that they're going to have to train them if they're a player in the process with or without a system. So even if you were passing them an Excel sheet, you're going to have to give them some sort of information about how you need them to participate in the process and where their discretion is needed for the employees that roll up to them. So whether you use a system or whether you use an Excel, there is going to be a certain level of communication with the players in your process as to what you expect from them and how they will participate in the process, especially if they're the ones who are going to be communicating to the employee at the end of what the final pay decision is for that employee, including those players along the way, is important. Mm-hmm. Second, choosing a system and making your configuration as intuitive as possible is also important. You and you alone know how tech savvy your user base is and the types of bells and whistles and features that they will be looking for. And I would make the suggestion to only turn on what will be useful for them. And as Sam mentioned, maybe turning more on in subsequent years. That will cut down on what you need to train them on. It will cut down on the questions and the support that you have to provide them internally while your process is opened as well.
Yeah, I think that we're all, we're all in a situation where there can be different plans across different individuals, and making sure you're looking at the right information is critical. And also, I mean, I think training and coming up to speed on new systems is important. And that's why most systems should be designed very intuitive. And so it doesn't require a lot of training, right? But then in other situations, do you use, what's your training format that you use? Do you use certain like micro training or anything like that in your systems?
So with our implementations, we train the core team, and then typically the core team is training their end users. And we typically see a one-page job aid and some sort of training on a scrambled training environment just before the cycle opens. So again, they'll forget it if you train them weeks in advance or if you give them a 20-page document to read. So keeping it short and sweet and right before they have to log in is sort of the best way to go when you're rolling out a system.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree with you more, Rebecca. So often we see some of our clients really wanting to be overly proactive in providing training, and they want to roll out system training along with other manager training that they're doing regarding performance reviews or new tools that they're launching, and in trying to bring them back and really just focus on providing specific training just before they're actually going to use the tool, so it's fresh.
Yes. And the home screen dashboard can be a great communication tool with your users as well. Any key points that you need them to remember, or the job aid can be integrated there as well, so that they can pop it open and sort of have them side by side. But people are busy and are juggling a lot of things all at once, so short and sweet and right before they need to know is sort of the best approach.
We just got another question, I think, from Susan about, does Compose integrate with any HRIS platforms?
We do. So yes, at a minimum, we're going to need employee level data, and I think that's going to be common across the board. So your employee roster, their pay information, their job information, and then all of the additional data that may come from either your suited solution for HCM or finance, payroll data to really build out everything that the planner would need to see while they're making their recommendations. But in terms of connection points, there's usually two options. One is some sort of file transfer, and that can be automated. So the other option is a direct API, where you are taking data in real time, either from a source or from Compose back to the source at the end. So both of those are probably best discussed with your implementation team, but I will just caution you, depending on how your plans work, it isn't always the best option to have data automatically flowing into the system, especially when you have calculated plans. So consider if someone's target changes and that's brought into the system, that's going to recalculate their bonus. What if their manager has already been in the system, has seen it, is that the right decision? So lots of aspects to consider in solving that level of real-time integration versus flat file transfer that's automated.
Great. Thank you.
Well, great. So this is I really love seeing this system and so forth, but we are coming in our last minutes of our time here. So what I'd like to do is launch this polling to those that are attending. And basically with this polling, you can choose to have any, if you want to have time with any of us to discuss these systems and common things around your particular situation, or if you'd like another free demo of DecuSoft to go through it and see if it's the right system for your company, feel free to go ahead and sign up for this polling here, and we'll make sure that we'll put you in contact with the right people.
Sam, I'm not allowed to vote?
You can call me anytime, Bob. It's all right.
Also, I think earlier someone asked about whether we'll be making this information and the slides available, Sam.
Yeah, so this information is being broadcast on Facebook Live right now, so it'll be shown there, and then I'll also be posted on our website, and there's a YouTube channel that we have, and so you'll be receiving a link after the session here to those locations, and so feel free to reach out if you have any questions on that.
Thanks so much for having us. This was a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks all the participants. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, everyone. You take care and have a wonderful week.
You too. Take care. Be well.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.